So I've been thinking about something lately. There was a pretty long stretch in media where everything was just dark, moody, and a little edgy. And I was trying to figure out why that was and why it ended. And I mean everything from the black leather of The Matrix to the endless night of Max Payne. The turn of the millennium was dark and moody. Most of popular media took a pretty dramatic turn towards like a dark and cynical aesthetic. It was the era of anti-heroes and villains, moral ambiguity, and a sense of gloom that seeped into our movies and video games. Was it a coincidence that everyone was just having the same ideas at the same time and regurgitating what they saw before? Or was something going on in media that was mirroring what we saw in real life? Was there a newfound pessimism? I don't think all of this was a coincidence. I think it was a reflection of the world grappling with the end of a prosperous decade and the dawn of a new one. Especially with the turn of the millennium, Y2K was surrounded with fear and uncertainty. It was a world that was anxious, disillusioned, and pretty soon about to be traumatized. And I think this is what started our gritty chapter. But what led up to this change in media? I feel like for many, the mid to late 90s felt like a time of peace and prosperity. The Cold War was over, the economy was booming, and the dot-com crash had yet to happen. And I feel like that optimism was reflected in a lot of media, which could afford to be more colorful and less worried about existential dread. Now, it's not to say that the 90s weren't edgy, especially with things like the counterculture in music. Grunge was in full swing, showing the world and the youth a new form of nihilism. Death metal and grindcore was experimenting with what extreme music could be. You had pissed off music like Earth Crisis that swept through the 90s, spreading straight edge, vegan, and environmentally conscious living, or strange gothic experimental bands like Nine Inch Nails. And per usual, this counterculture eventually started slipping into the mainstream. There was a quiet rebellion brewing in the cubicles of corporate America. The dot-com boom promised a cool, futuristic way to work, but for many, it just meant longer hours in a soul-crushing office. And movies were the first to pick up on it. You saw a brand new uptrend in anti-corporate films. In 1999, movies like Office Space, Fight Club, American Beauty, and The Matrix all pushed one powerful idea: that your stable, well-paying job is actually just a cage, and the only way to set yourself free was to burn it all down and stomp on the ashes. Those movies always showed characters just destroying everything around them that had to do with their stable lifestyle, all for the sake of freedom. These movies were capturing a growing cultural fatigue. They showed our heroes trapped in boring lives who find liberation through chaotic and violent rebellion. It all suggests that the comfortable life we were all supposed to want is actually a kind of spiritual depression, and the system itself was the enemy. And if this wasn't a sign that good times were starting to feel hollow, I don't know what was. And that anti-corporate anger was just the start. The turn of the millennium was a pressure cooker for anxieties that we've never had before. First, we had a technological anxiety. The 90s were full of excitement but also fear about new technology. The internet was this new, wild frontier, but it brought new fears. Movies like The Net, Strange Days, and Existence explored the worries about losing your identity to cybercrime and the line blurring between what's real and what's virtual. All of these new worries and anxieties cultivated in The Matrix, a film that perfectly bottles that fear. And it created this new nagging suspicion that the world is a simulation. There were books and films to create simulated worlds before The Matrix, but I'm pretty confident it's the first piece of media to suggest that we already live there and it's all an illusion. And it was such a cultural phenomenon, it really captured everything we were going to see over the next few years. The green color tones, slick leather, slow motion bullet time violence, it all became a cornerstone of that edgy 2000s look. This heavy shift in 1999 wasn't just felt in media alone. People were already feeling an end-of-the-century unease, even before anything had actually happened yet. A sense of dread was creeping in. The Columbine High School massacre in 1999 shattered America's sense of safety and became a dark cultural landmark. Horrible events like this are bound to shatter the illusion of stability and safety for most people. When you send your kids off to school, they're supposed to be fucking safe. So if you interrupt that in any way, shape, or form, How is that not going to nag at you until the end of time? Anytime anybody's safety is disrupted en masse, then it's going to cause a cultural shift. That's the exact reason why there's a cultural line between the pre 9/11 world and the post 9/11 world. There was a good stretch of history where disasters were reserved for weather events and violence was reserved for soldiers at war. This era of relative peace was ending, and it was replaced by a culture of fear and paranoia. And this shift gets reflected in art and media almost immediately. You had borderline propaganda in shows like 24 that normalized this win at all costs mentality for our national security. Even a long-running show like CSI started getting grittier and started focusing on the darkest parts of our society. Even news channels that were now chasing ratings with 24/7 tickers blurred the line between information and some sort of morbid entertainment. Stories were getting darker, and Islamophobia in media had become more common. The entertainment industry often equated Islam with terrorism. The world started feeling darker and darker, and it was only because our media was holding up a magnifying glass to it. And the effect the world was having on media wasn't exclusive to TV and movies. Video games were having their own gritty revolution. Consoles were evolving, and the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube were powerful enough to create a more realistic world, and developers used that power to get dark. Calling back to what we talked about earlier, the Matrix effect was huge. Bullet time, a feature popularized by the Matrix, was now becoming a defining gameplay mechanic across the games of the 2000s. And no game did it better than 2001's Max Payne. Max Payne had a very film noir story about a traumatized cop in a perpetually rainy, gray city, and it was the perfect interactive version of what that post 9/11 mood is. This kind of marked a change in gaming as a whole, and the industry started chasing a more mature look. Even going as far as rebooting beloved franchises with a more dark and gritty twist. Even more kid-friendly heroes were being changed to fit this darker aesthetic. Prince of Persia went from being more lighthearted and colorful to being The Warrior Within, a gloomy, heavy metal bloodbath, borrowing a lot of hack and slash mechanics from games like Devil May Cry. Even Sonic the Hedgehog's rival got his own game. Shadow the Hedgehog swore, used guns, and had an evil alien in his brain telling him what to do. It felt like every single franchise, from Jak and Daxter to Bomberman, was getting some sort of grimdark makeover, and they usually had pretty shitty results. But this effect even held on new IPs like Soldier of Fortune that pushed gore to a new level with realistic violence. I remember in the very first mission there's a guy taking a piss on a subway wall and you blow his legs off with a Spaz 12. It's kinda badass. That was a cool game. Around this time, Rockstar created one of the first games I ever purchased that required an ID, and that game was State of Emergency. It was an arcadey third-person beat-em-up / shooter, where your main goal was to stop this regime that had taken over the US. What made the game pretty controversial was the open-source nature of what you were allowed to do. The game featured a pretty sizable amount of characters on screen all at the same time, and the game had an open-ended nature in terms of player agency, so in theory, you could just pick up an assault rifle and gun down everybody in a mall. While this didn't let you pass the mission and actually garnered you negative points, I could see why people had a problem with it. When this grittier, darker gaming era was in full swing, it destroyed the fucking color palette. I mean, every game was gray or fucking brown or piss yellow. It kinda sucked. You even had some games taking themselves a little too seriously, like Prototype, which isn't a bad game as far as gameplay is concerned, but the stylistic choices and the story itself are the edgiest shit that's ever been created. The game is basically a white kid with a buzz cut getting superpowers, and someone stole his Monster Energy drink, and he is pissed. And not all games around this time were just fucking angry and edgy to be angry and edgy. Some actually had a story to tell. Grand Theft Auto was constantly releasing games that kind of had like gritty undertones, but in a way that was very comedic. While Grand Theft Auto 4 did have its funny moments, it was more so telling a bleak, somber story about the death of the American dream. And launching around 2008, I think it came out at the perfect time. There was a pretty clear message being told most of the time, and that serious and mature meant dark, violent, and cynical. And in the lens of society as a whole, I think we are just a product of our environment. And you might ask yourself, what changed between, now and the late 2000s? What happened to my dirty brown piss filter? How come all of my characters in my video games aren't Caucasian skinheads anymore? Well, by the early 2010s, the dark and moody era was kind of starting to fade, and there was a couple big reasons behind that. The biggest reason was we kind of were getting sick of it. Audiences were getting tired of just relentless bleakness. If every hero is a brooding anti-hero and every story is drenched in nihilism, it stops having an impact and just becomes exhausting. The dark and gritty trend just kind of became a joke, and it was a checklist of grit and gore that forgot how to make a good story. People wanted something that offered a little hope, not just a reflection of our own world. It's media, it's not real, so why does it have to be real? And in terms of cultural shifts, I think Rockstar Games is the least tone deaf when it comes to what's going on in the world and the story that needs to be told. They made a pretty clear choice in Grand Theft Auto V to bring back some of the fun. It was bright, colorful, and satirical. It was kind of like a rejection of the bleakness that came in GTA 4 before it. A new cultural force was forming. This saw the birth of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man, which did two things. It captured this private sector of warfare that we were experiencing in the modern era, while giving us a superhero with brighter tones and a more optimistic way of looking at things. It was a really good blend for that time period. You had real-life problems being solved in a fantastical and hopeful way. MCU grew into a global powerhouse. Its vibrant colors and clear morality kind of became the new normal for blockbusters. And while I do have a slight distaste for a lot of the later MCU movies and really any blockbuster coming out today, I think it's really important for the culture to have something that's hopeful and optimistic in the mainstream. It's part of escapism. You should be able to choose to watch something or play something that doesn't depress the ever-loving shit out of you. The rise of edgy media in the 90s and 2000s was never just a style choice. It was a direct response to what was going on in the world at the time. If you grew up around this time, you were born into a digital age full of anxieties fueled by anti-corporate anger, and it was all cemented with the shared trauma of what was going on at the time. For a little over a decade, those gray and brown worlds, brooding anti-heroes, and cynical stories was just how we were processing things. But like all cultural movements, the era had to end. We got tired of darkness and started looking for the light. Whether it was the satirical fun of GTA 5 or the bright heroism of Marvel's Cinematic Universe. But even still, the legacy of that moody era is important. It showed us that the mainstream media could be a place for complex adult conversations about trauma and morality, and it gave us some of the most iconic characters and worlds in pop culture. These are all artifacts from a time when we all stared into that abyss together. With all that being said, what piece of dark and moody media from that era stuck with you the most, and why do you think it still resonates? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this look back, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Personally, I was a bit of a latchkey kid, and I felt like a lot of the media I grew up with kind of raised me, and I like looking back at stuff like this because it kind of helps me define why I am the way that I am. So go grab a bucket of popcorn, get you a nice gallon of soda, and rewatch The Matrix. It's a good movie. It rocks. I'll see you on the next one.